I think we can begin now. Does everybody have their coffee? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about academic writing and specifically plagiarism. So give me 1 second. Okay. Hang on 1 second. Okay, so my focus today is on academic writing and plagiarism in specific. So I will begin by talking to you about what is plagiarism. I will move on to ways we can address plagiarism, and I will talk to you about tasks and skills and things we can do in class to help minimize plagiarism. And I will finish off with questions and answers. So my first question to you is, I want to see what you consider plagiarism. So can you please comment in the comment section what plagiarism is for you? What do you consider plagiarism? Stealing, okay. It's a good point. What else? Other ideas? Okay, conscious copying, all right. Yes, without using critical thinking, yeah. People working, paste, yeah, copy paste from other people's work, yes. Yes, a lot of copying, What if I add this? Do you have zero tolerance or some tolerance of plagiarism? Zero, and never, okay. Zero. EAP, okay, okay. Okay, yes, some tolerance due to the fact that they may not know exactly what they're doing. Okay, good point. Now, let's move on to what I think. I've heard what I think plagiarism is, what I consider plagiarism. As you've said, I believe that it's copying someone's words or work or ideas without mentioning where you found the source. And that extends to even copying yourself, and not mentioning yourself as a source when you are writing. Plagiarism can occur when you are quoting. Plagiarism can occur when you are paraphrasing or summarizing. And it doesn't just have to do with ideas or pictures or words, it could be tables, it could be music. There are lots of things people copy and forget to cite. So it's, when they're not doing it on purpose, it can still be considered plagiarism. Okay, so let's see what I will be talking about. So one of the first things I want to talk to you about is, why do students plagiarize? Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. Okay, so why do students plagiarize? Well, there are many reasons why students plagiarize. And to name a few, they do not manage their time well. So my experience is mostly from teaching EAP students, English for academic purposes. So I do see this very often. So students have a lot of work to do, and the workload is heavy, and some of them are new international students who have never used sources or have never heard the term plagiarism before, so they find it very difficult to cope with the workload, to manage the material they have, so it's easier to copy. Another thing is, and this is what I found according to research from the Nottingham University website, is that somewhat to challenge to see if the teacher will find, okay, I don't think this is what usually happens, but it is based on research, what has been found. Other students don't feel comfortable paraphrasing, so they just think it's easier to copy something. And this can often be found, some students who come from other countries who have a different educational background believe that you cannot touch material that's in a book because it's made by someone, it's written by someone who is like a guru. So you shouldn't do anything to it. So they just leave it like that out of respect, okay? They may not even know how to paraphrase or how to reference, so they do it out of ignorance. They do not realize they are plagiarizing. And some feel a lot of pressure to succeed. So they do end up plagiarizing. Moving on. Okay. So what can you do to help minimize or eliminate plagiarism? So I found some information when I was preparing for this presentation, and some of this is from sources I have found, and some is from my own experience and from what I've seen in class. So first of all, it's very, very important to inform your learners about what plagiarism is. So you need to clarify what it is. They need to understand what it is and why they're not supposed to do it. It's not just about stealing or copying someone's ideas. It's also that you don't you don't help the reader. So if someone wants to use information that you have included, they cannot find it. And there's the ethical part, like you shouldn't do it because it's someone else's work. Another thing, when you inform your learners, I think it's a good suggestion, it's a good idea to get them to sign a form saying that this is my own work, to take responsibility for what they are handing in. It's very important that they take responsibility for their writing. They might look at it a bit more carefully. Another thing that you can do when you are informing your learners about plagiarism is to show them what happens when you plagiarize. Give them examples of what has happened to people who have plagiarized. We have examples of like musicians who have plagiarized, or ministers who have plagiarized and lost their job. So, you know, it's not just about it's not just about academics, it's also about what can happen. Like all these things, you need to inform your students about them. Okay, now let me move on to my next slide. Okay, so after you inform your learners about what plagiarism is, you can use some tasks to get your learners to avoid plagiarism. Can I see some of the tasks you use in class? What kind of tasks do you use in class to get them to learn about plagiarism and talk about it? Okay. Teach them how to cite. Yes, that's an important thing. What else can you do? show them examples and samples. Yes, I'm going to paraphrasing, of course. Yes. So all these ideas are tasks we can use to help them minimize and understand what plagiarism is. So there are tasks you can use in class which will help minimize plagiarism. How can you do this? First of all, it's important that you vary your tasks because you may have new students who know old students. So this does give them an opportunity to copy from each other or to get ideas, to, you know, see what the teacher has used and then know and find things and then use it again. So vary your tasks. Another thing that's important, another idea is when you have students who are from the same cohort, it's better to give them different tasks or give them different types of data or different types of sources so they don't have exactly the same material. And this will help, this will minimize the opportunities to copy from each other. It's very important to create opportunities for your learners to learn from their plagiarized text. So, you know, when somebody submits, and this is what I think, it's very important to get them to submit first drafts of something, especially when they are doing a research project. So when they submit a first draft and you spot instances of plagiarism, it's really important to use these texts as a learning tool. I'm going to talk a bit about this later on in my presentation. So we've already talked about addressing plagiarism and tasks you can use. Now I'm going to move on and talk about requesting proof. So when you receive a written text from your learners, a project from your learners, it's a really good idea to ask them to bring you a copy of the source they have used or a photocopy. So if they are paraphrasing or summarizing something in a project, it's a good idea to bring a copy in and highlight the sections they have used so you can actually see what they have used and they can actually check, because before they hand it in, they will see what they've highlighted and they will probably cross-reference it with what they have. So this might be one way to get them to reflect and realize and think about what they are writing in their project, what they've written in their project. Another thing is when you ask your students to submit work and you have they have to write, for example, a research project, which is a long process, you can ask them to tell you the progress of their work, to bring in pieces of the work so you can check plagiarism in stages, so you can check their writing with them while they are drafting something. Another thing I would like to talk to you about is, after requesting proof, another good idea is to let them know that you are looking for plagiarism, not because you want to punish them, but because this is something that they shouldn't be doing and it should motivate them to work harder. So they should know that you are looking for plagiarism. As a teacher, it's important that we train ourselves on how to use, how to use software available to detect plagiarism. So it's really, really important that you know how to use, for example, Turnitin, or you know how to use Viper or all the different types of software that's available. And also, you know, when you give them feedback or when you assess their work, you assess the work based on some criteria. So let them know that one of the criteria is how well they have paraphrased, how well they have quoted, so that you are looking at those things as well. This is very important. And I'm going to conclude this little introduction about addressing plagiarism and steps a teacher can take, and talk about measures. So You inform your learners, you train them, but you also need to let them know that there will be consequences for plagiarism. And I'm not talking about scaring them, but motivating them to avoid it. Um, and if you do detect plagiarism, you take the measures. I don't know. Some people can ask for a second draft, give the learners a second chance. Some may ask for, I don't know, whatever your university or whatever your work, whatever the organization you are working for suggests should happen when a student is caught plagiarizing. So these are some of the steps um, a teacher can take in order to um, deal with plagiarism. Okay, I'm sorry. You can see my face a lot. I apologize for this, but I do have a little bit of a difficulty seeing the screen. Everything's a little bit smaller, so that's why you're seeing close-ups of me. I apologize for that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about tasks and things we can do. Oh, sorry. Before I conclude, I want to say that once you find the plagiarism, a good idea is to talk to your student about it and try to find out why your learner has plagiarized and what has happened, and try to help him. And this is better to be done, during a tutorial, not so much um, in front of the class. Don't show on the screen results of Turnitin with 80% plagiarism, because this is not very productive. You are dealing with adults probably, or younger learners if it's for a school project, but it's better to talk to them, you know, and try to find what has happened and why this is going on. Okay, now I want to look at tasks in specific. So in the chat box, hi Vicky, in the chat box, can you please write down types of tasks you use with your learners? And right now I think I feel a bit more relaxed. So, okay, time to take a big breath and move on. So can I see what types of tasks? So when someone mentioned paraphrasing. What types of tasks do you use to help them paraphrase? Can I see some ideas in the chat box? Or different types of ideas. And let's not just focus on ideas on how to help your learners paraphrase. What about quoting? They can still plagiarize when they are quoting someone. So I'm waiting a little bit to see the ideas, see your ideas, and then I'm going to talk about some of my ideas. I see people typing. Okay. Hmm. Writing summaries. Okay. Writing summaries in class. Yes, that's one thing you can do. What other things do you do with your learners? Or what do you do to help yourself when you are using sources? Because we're all teachers and we probably all write stuff. So, okay. Reordering, yep. Rewording simpler sentences, yes. Rewriting sentences, yes. I see some ideas. Some of these ideas are on the slides that follow. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about tasks you would use to get your students to make them familiar with what plagiarism is. So one thing I do with my learners is I either get them to research the topic and then, they can give a poster presentation or a PowerPoint presentation in groups and tell me what plagiarism is, why they shouldn't do it, different types of plagiarism. So get the learners involved and get them to tell me. Okay, so they're the teachers, I'm the learner. I think that's a good way to get them involved. Another thing I do very often when I'm introducing plagiarism to my EAP students is, use YouTube videos. There are loads of YouTube videos with cartoons which talk about plagiarism. So they add a bit of fun side, a fun approach to plagiarism, which is serious. So it's a little bit, makes them laugh, they remember it more, things like that. So that's another thing I do with my learners. I think that getting them to reflect on whatever they present is also something very, very important. Um, and the other, yes, and the other thing that's important is to get them to research what happens if they plagiarize at school or at university or wherever, and what happens to, people who have plagiarized. So they can see in the bigger picture. So this is one way, this is one idea on how to get students to, explore and try to understand what plagiarism is. So I'm not talking about paraphrasing or summarizing. This is just addressing the topic of plagiarism with your learners. Now, another thing that's very, very important, and you have mentioned it here in the chat box, is noticing activities, plagiarized text versus non-plagiarized text. So you give them handouts with text and then you tell them to try to figure out which ones have plagiarism and which ones don't have plagiarism. And another thing I do with my learners is when I have a text that is a really good text that has no plagiarism in it, it's a very good paraphrase of a text. I try to tell them to identify the changes in the language, make tables. Tables work well with learners, I think, because it gives them some kind of understanding of what happens to the language. So this word, oops, okay, I lost my presentation. It doesn't matter. So it gives them a type of understanding of what has happened to the language and things like that. You can also use noticing activities for paraphrasing and summarizing what happened to, you have the whole text on one side, a paraphrase on the other, get them in groups to talk about the differences in the language, in the structure, in the forms, everything. In groups and then pairs and then individually. I think it's very important when you're trying to help learners who are not the strongest learners, to try to help them and give them as much support as you can. So start with group work, move on to individual work. So noticing is what we do, one type of activity. Another thing you can do with your learners is some kind of mind map, a terminology check. So you make something like a mind map, okay? In the middle you have on this mind map all the buzz terms, all the terms that have to do with plagiarism or, I don't know, collaboration, collusion. You put all these words on your smartboard or on an overhead projector and you start asking, what's this, what's that, have a group discussion. Or you could ask them to match, you know, the words on the mind map with the definition. So this is another thing, checking all the terminology and making sure that they understand the terminology and try to, you know, they understand it so they know what it is. Have you used any of the things I've talked about so far? Do you do any of these things? Okay, see people typing yes. All right. Okay. I'm going to show you another type of task you can use, another idea. Okay. Um, yes, it's very important, and thank you for mentioning this. It's very important that you clarify what type of reference system you are using. So are you using the Harvard referencing system? Are you using the MLA, the APA? Like, it's very important that your learners know what type of referencing system. Yeah. Okay. Now, paraphrasing. We've all been talking about it. So students can plagiarize a lot when they are trying to paraphrase. So I'm going to talk about some of the activities you can use with them, try to help them paraphrase better. So the first one, you can see keyword transformation. Now, before you start rolling your eyes, I'm going to explain what I mean by keyword transformation, because we all know what keyword transformation is, excuse me, when you're teaching for FCE or a Cambridge exam. But what I suggest is when you have a text, you can paraphrase it yourself and then see how you, the teacher, has paraphrased the text, and then use some of your sentences as a guide and use your sentence on top, use the text sentence as the first sentence, and then underneath your paraphrase. But just the beginning of your paraphrase, not the rest of the sentence. Excuse me, not the rest of the sentence. So they have the text sentence and your paraphrase underneath, but half of it. So they have to fill in the rest. So you're kind of scaffolding them, okay? You're kind of guiding them towards the transformation, but you're not actually using a keyword transformation. Skeleton sentences, you have your whole text on top, and then skeleton sentences underneath, but again, you have to paraphrase it, or you find something that's paraphrased, and then you get your learners to work from the skeleton sentences to paraphrase. So these are really good activities you can use when your learners are quite weak, they don't have a lot of experience with paraphrasing. So this is something you can do with your learners. Now, another thing I do with my learners, it's because I have been teaching international students for quite a while now. I think it's a good idea to begin, so learners who don't use English as a first language, I think it's a good idea to begin with a group paraphrase. You know, get your learners into groups, give them text, and then tell them to paraphrase in groups. Then you have like 2 or 3 groups, then each group swaps, gives another group their paraphrase. So the second group looks at the paraphrase and comments, and, you know, tries to see if there is plagiarism and gives feedback to the first group's paraphrase. So then they hand back the paraphrase, and each group works on a paraphrase with feedback on it. So they redraft and they learn and they redraft, and this can go on, swapping paraphrases just to get them to draft and redraft, because drafting and redrafting will help them learn a lot. You know, you can learn how to paraphrase if you write and then write again, and getting them to do a group paraphrase and swapping with their classmates, getting feedback from the classmate, not the teacher, like the classmate saying, hey, you've copied something here, maybe you need to look at it. it may be easier for them, okay? So try that if you haven't already. Of course, you could have blown up on your overhead projector or on your smartboard, good paraphrase, bad paraphrase, get your learners to reflect. Why is this good? Why is that bad? And another thing you can try is the game Taboo. We know this game, so this works better when you're trying to find synonyms or words that have similar meanings to nouns. So, you know, you have a word on a card and then someone has to describe it and the other has to guess. So the people who are trying to describe the word are actually paraphrasing. So they're trying to use different words to describe a different noun. So this is something you could do as well. Not so much for paraphrasing, for finding synonyms or things like that. Are there any ideas about paraphrasing or paraphrasing tasks you really want to mention? If yes, can I see it in the chat box? Otherwise, I'm moving on to my next slide. Okay, don't see anybody typing yet. So, moving on then, I will address another type of skill we need to train our learners in order to help them minimize plagiarism. So again, I think it's better when you're teaching your students, especially for the first time, how to paraphrase or how to summarize. I think it's better to, when you're teaching a summary, to get them to make long summaries. It's easier to write a longer summary than a short one, a one-sentence summary. Okay, so begin with something that is easier and then move on to something harder. Last year I had students and I gave them like big text and then I said, okay, I want you to summarize this big text into 50 words. So they did. And then I said, well, now summarize the 50-word paragraph into a one-sentence line, like into one sentence. And this is what you will be using in your text. So as a source, you will cite it. So they find it easier to write bigger summaries when they have a long text, but they find it harder to write one sentence summary. So maybe start with something longer and then move on to something shorter. Another idea is to give your learners, again, examples of good summaries and examples of bad summaries, and then get them to reflect on what's good about the summary, what's bad about the summary, okay? And then you could also have a summary. You have your whole text, and then underneath the summary with gaps. So they just have to fill in a few words. So it's not as difficult as, I don't know, summarizing a whole text. So you can use these activities in different order. Just play around and see what works with your learners more. Another thing I think is a good idea is getting your learners to summarize from a read aloud text. So you read something in class, and then you tell them, okay, I want you to write down notes and work from these notes and try to make a summary. This can work with paraphrasing as well. So you can read a text aloud, tell them to make notes, and then they write a summary or a paraphrase. This is good because maybe, you know, it's not just about reading, they can listen as well. Some learners might prefer to listen to something instead of just reading. Reading circle. What do I mean by this? Again, like the group paraphrases, what I do with my learners very often is I put them in groups of 4. I ask them to all write a summary, and then they exchange their summaries. So every student looks at another person's summary and gives feedback. So they may be writing the same summary, but each student produces a different text, and they give peer feedback. And I think peer feedback works very well in these cases. And, you know, getting advice from a classmate is really good and it's helpful. And other tasks you can use, you know, you have a full text, then you have a summary. You can cut up the summary into strips of paper. You can tell them to put the paper in the right order or put the summary in the right order without even cutting it up. And finally, jigsaw reading always works well. So give one student half of a text, the other student the other half of the text. You get your students to make notes. Then you take away the texts. Don't let your students keep the text. You take away the text, and then you tell them to recreate, to rewrite, or to summarize the text together. So this is another thing you can do with your learners to help them. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about critical analysis. Yeah, I know. Finding how to, learning how to paraphrase is really, really difficult. I know. It just takes a lot of time. I'm just commenting on the comment I see in the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to talk about critical analysis and how does critical analysis fit into this? You know, your learners, they find sources and they think, oh, this is a fantastic source. I'm going to write about internet banking and I found a really good source on internet banking and I want to use this source in my research paper. But they don't really understand the source, but it's on internet banking, so it must be good. So this is where you have to get them to analyze the text. If your learners don't understand what is in the text they want to use as part of as a source in their projects, then they will probably plagiarize because they haven't understood what they are reading. So when you don't understand what you're reading, how are you going to paraphrase it? How are you going to summarize it? It's impossible. So it's easier to plagiarize. It's easier. It's inevitable, probably. So when you have, when you want to help your learners with a research project, you ask them to bring in their sources, bring your sources into class, and then get them to annotate them and say, why am I using this source? What does this source say? What does it mean? And then, once they know why they are using something, once they really understand the information in the source they want to use, maybe then it's easier for them to, you know, summarize it, paraphrase it, and use it in a text. Maybe it's a good idea to tell them to talk to to another person in their class about the text, the sources they want to use, and say why they want to use. Because when you're telling someone why you want to use a source, you're not actually going to be reading from the source. You're going to explain why you want to use something. You're going to explain the information. So talking to a classmate about the information is one way of paraphrasing. So it's really important. Do you ask your learners to bring in sources in class when you want to get them to paraphrase something? Do you do this? I'm asking people to see. Do your students bring in material? Do you bring in material into class and do the work with them, or do you tell them to bring in their laptops with their articles and ask them to show you what they're using or explain to you why they want to use a source? You ask them to bring in their laptops, yep, laptops, tablets, books. Okay, so oops. Now, hang on. Okay, so critical analysis is very important. The next thing I think is really important, and I think this is probably the hardest activity when you're talking about academic writing and when you want to get your learners to use sources, is synthesizing information. Do you agree? Do you think that synthesizing information is extremely difficult? not just paraphrasing and summarizing and using sources, but combining sources in academic writing. Can I see? Yes. So what do the people here think? Can you tell me some of the things you do in class to help your learners practice synthesizing? Because I have 3 points here, but I was really, really struggling with this. It's very difficult. Yeah, it's difficult when you're speaking English and it's you're a native English speaker, like a speaker. I think this is tricky. So in order for your learners to be able to synthesize information and avoid plagiarism, they really, really need to know how to paraphrase well, summarize well, and know why they're using the information in the sources. Like, it's a combination. Asking, okay, that's a good point. More with listening and speaking, asking students to synthesize what they have heard. Yeah, connecting, making connections. I think in this case, as far as synthesizing is concerned, it is really, really important to get your learners to draft and redraft and never submit something that is a first draft. Because a first draft is something that they have only written once or twice. Fifth draft is something that they will hopefully have looked at more than once or twice. So I think it's really important. But synthesizing, and I don't know about you guys, but I find it very difficult to make synthesizing information fun. How can you make it fun? Any ideas from the audience? I see people typing, so I am going to give it a little bit of time to see what you think about synthesizing. You know, using different sources to support your arguments. Yes, I agree, Ageliki. Exactly. Well, that's why I'm asking, like, how can you make synthesizing information fun? I don't know. It beats me. It's really something that modeling the process, yes, modeling. A good example of synthesized information and a bad example. And everything I have discussed, you know, getting them, I think as far as academic writing is concerned, because it's concerned, you know, you try to, the more group work, the more discussion, the more reflective you are. I think it's the more useful and the easier it will become for your learners. So yeah. Okay, so I've seen that most of you agree with me that synthesizing is difficult and it needs a lot of training. So try to make your paraphrasing, your summarizing parts as fun as possible and then get them to synthesize. Finally, this is something I have tried with my learners. When I get them to write essays, I haven't tried it yet with my EAP students, but I will. And I will probably blog about it, blog about this. So your students submit a text, a project, something they have written, and they have integrated sources in this text. One thing you can do, one thing you will do, is give feedback. Of course, we write and write and write and write. We make comments and comments and comments. So, do you ever wonder if your learners are actually reading what you have written? Because I often do wonder. I've written so much in my feedback page, so much. And then I think, oh man, is this learner going to read it or am I just writing it? So what I did and what I am going to do is that I gave a feedback Q&A. So I wrote all my comments, and after the comments, I made a separate page with questions about my comments. So I'll give you an example. So say your learner has difficulty in the text they have submitted with paraphrasing. You can give some comments about things the learner can do to improve. So you could write in your comments page, I think you need to use different structures. Maybe you need to find synonyms. You need to rewrite some of the sentences. And then on the next page, on your Q&A page, you could ask your learner, so how can you paraphrase better? So what your learner will have to do is read your comments carefully and then answer questions about your comments. And this has worked with my learners when they wrote essays for like exam preparation. I know in an EAP context it will require more work because, well, you have to make a question page. So you don't just make a feedback page, you make questions related to your feedback. But I think it's a good idea and I think you should try it because learners do learn a lot. So it's another idea you could try to get them to reflect on the mistakes they have made, especially if these mistakes have to do with paraphrasing or summarizing or synthesizing. Give them advice and then ask about the advice you have given, or give them little activities like follow your feedback should be followed up by links or suggestions on where they can go for extra practice. I see someone typing. Let's see. Okay. So that's what I think. These are some of the tasks you can use with your learners when you want to get them and help them minimize plagiarism. Yeah, e-portfolio of original. Yep, that's a good idea. Recreating, making a portfolio of original and rewrites. That's a very good idea. Thanks, Cecilia. So, okay, moving on. I'm going to mention two different types of software you can use. This one, Mendeley, I heard about this last week during my training at Sheffield because I'm currently teaching at the University of Sheffield, the ELTC Centre. So we had a training session on Mendeley. Have you used this? Do you know what it is? Haha. Okay, so listen carefully, fellow teachers. Okay, so this is a software where, now I haven't used it that much. I only learned about it last week because of the training I had at Sheffield University. But it is a software where you can upload your PDF files of journals. You choose the referencing system, it's Harvard or APA or whatever, and then, yes, and then it can give you the reference of the reference. So it can compile a reference list based on the PDF files you upload. So it's a way, it's a way to reference without having to do it yourself. The software does it for you. So this is one way to help your learners avoid plagiarizing in their reference list. I wish I had this when I was doing I wish I knew about it. I don't know if it existed when I was doing my MA, because writing a reference list is very hard, and this software just does it for you. It's really good. Try it. Also ReadCube. Okay, I see some other types of software you could probably use. Thanks for that. And Turnitin as a learning tool. So when I think it's better to use Turnitin with your learners when you have one-to-one tutorials. Have you used Turnitin? How many of you have used Turnitin? Yeah. So Turnitin is a place where you can upload your projects and then it detects plagiarism. So when you have a one-to-one tutorial with your learner, you can show them the plagiarized paragraphs or sections, and you can ask them or you can work with them and work on their work, ask them to paraphrase or tell you why they plagiarized or what happened. So it's better to use it as a learning tool than as like, ooh, look, you got 40% of plagiarism. Ooh, why did you do this? You know, it's better to try to get your learners to help them, and whenever you detect plagiarism, motivate them and try to figure out why, get them to reflect on why this has happened. So these are some of the activities you can use with your learners and try to get them to um, to avoid plagiarism. Do you have any other ideas on tasks? So we talked about paraphrasing, we talked about summarizing, you know, buzz term checkers, we talked about synthesizing information, which is very tricky, and it has to do with paraphrasing and summarizing. We talked about using models, good models versus bad models and things like that. Now, are there any other tasks you use in class? And I'm talking about tasks that minimize plagiarism when it's a quotation or when it's a paraphrase or a summary, any type of activity you use with your learners in order to minimize or eliminate the chances of plagiarism. See people typing, so I'm going to wait a little bit. I want to see any ideas. Asking questions after reading and not looking at the text, okay. I think, yes. So this is something that's really important. When you read a text and then you want your learner to paraphrase it, I think it's, or summarize it, sometimes it can be a little bit dangerous if the learner keeps the text, because it's more possible that they will be relying on the text a lot. I think it's better if you get your learners used to taking notes from texts, taking notes and working from notes. A list of do and don'ts. Yes, this could be part of researching plagiarism, like what you can do when you are quoting, what you can do when you paraphrase or summarize, and what you shouldn't do. Good idea. Okay. So, okay. So let's just recap a little bit. So what I think is the most important thing is getting your learners to understand what plagiarism is, why it shouldn't be done. And also, as a teacher, we need to understand what it is, because sometimes we're not clear about it either. So it's really important that you know what you're talking about when you go into class, and you know your school's policy towards plagiarism or the university's policy towards plagiarism. So everybody needs to be well informed about what it is, how much tolerance there is towards it, because sometimes there could be a little bit of leniency, especially if the plagiarism isn't deliberate. So maybe there is a mistype or something like that. You can give your learner a second chance. In this case, they just got the author's name, they misspelt it, or they misspelt a date. So there can be a little bit of tolerance in those cases, but it's very important that you know what the people who you work, where you work, what kind of tolerance there is or what happens. Yeah, it's very, very important. And then try to use different types of exercises. Don't stick to the same tasks. Try to use different tasks to help your learners paraphrase, different tasks to get them to summarize, so they can, you know, practice different, because maybe group work doesn't work for everybody. Maybe some learners need more scaffolding compared to others. So maybe you need to begin with skeleton sentences or gap-filling summaries and then move on to harder tasks. It all depends on the needs of your learners. Okay, so these are some things you need to think of before addressing issues that have to do with paraphrasing or summarizing or plagiarism. All these things are important. What your learner needs for you, like what you need to do in order to help your learner. Okay, so if you want to connect with me, this is my information. I have a blog, I have a Twitter account. I'm on LinkedIn and on Facebook, so if you want to connect, feel free to do so. I see some people I know, some people I don't, so if you want to connect, please do so. Would be great. I want to thank all the universities I have worked for, because that's where I learned. That's where I had lots of training sessions. I want to thank Sheffield University. I want to thank the University of Bristol, where I worked last year, and into Newcastle. All the workshops, all the teachers there. It was really helpful, and I learned a lot from them. These are my references. Thank you for being here. And questions. Do you have any questions?